Welcome, Chris. I'm very happy that you agreed to have this conversation with me.
Thank you, Daniela. I'm looking forward to it too. It's a pleasure.
I told everybody that I will have a conversation with my spiral dynamics guru.
Okay.
That's how we met. No, I still remember in Lucerne when we met, and yeah, it was just a great course that you gave there.
Well, you make me blush, so you can spot my blushes easily.
Yeah,
But
that's
yes, it
okay.
was we met at a time in Switzerland, and it was a time when things were exploding in terms of
Yeah,
curiosity. And
yeah,
what year was
absolutely.
that? Which year was that you came on?
It must have been 2008,
Yes. Yeah.
8 or 9-ish,
Yeah,
but
probably.
rather eight, probably.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's when life was changing exponentially at that time.
yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly.
and I've got very fond memories. And obviously, your life has changed beyond all recognition. Who would
Oh,
have
yeah,
guessed you'd be
absolutely.
in this role that you're in now?
Yeah, no, we wouldn't. So, coming to the third attractor, do you know the term third attractor? Are you familiar with what
I,
is meant
I,
with it?
yeah, I've tracked it, and if my understanding of it is, it really builds upon Andrew's premise of the third wave, and the third attractor is really I suppose it's most closely aligned with what Andrew would call the evolutionary impulse, this space into which we're being invited to grow. So that's my sense and my interpretation of it, and also I
That
think there's
that's
an elegant simplicity in that.
that's interesting, but that's actually not where I'm coming from for the
Good.
conversation. Interestingly enough, that's more kind of my personal solution, having been with Andrew so long, because I agree the evolutionary impulse is a beautiful third attractor. But the term where I picked it up as a cultural term came from Daniel Schmachtenberger,
Okay. Okay.
and he was or is making this distinction between the first and second attractor. First attractor being uh, an attractor towards authoritarianism, where we see all these authoritarians and dictators come up, and
Right.
the second attractor being an attractor of chaos and anarchy. The
Yeah.
people that don't want to go
Okay.
the dictator route would go into anarchy and
Mhm.
chaos. And he is saying right now, our world, our global world, is going towards one of these two attractors. And he advocates more or less that we are called to find a third attractor that is more attractive than the first and the second. Something that would excite, would have probably a good narrative behind, and would actually be able to solve the huge problems we have in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for that. And you see I think if I go back to the original work of Claire Graves, who launched a lot of the integral psychology field, there was always the three dynamics. Okay. Um,
Mm,
the basically regression back to really I think of it as a Mad Max experience. Um, Chaos, localized authority, feudalism. The middle path would be where we believe we've cracked it and we believe that everything's okay, but it's becoming increasingly authoritarian because towards the tail end of the first tier, there's a desperation because the solutions aren't working. Okay.
yeah,
And increasingly, fewer people are listening. And then the third would be really where we um, get out of the way of our own ignorance as a species and emerge into what's next naturally. And that for me that's the link back to the evolutionary impulse, because really the evolutionary impulse is biased towards that path, even
yeah,
though there is information and benefit in all the other paths. But there's an evolutionary imperative, which everybody, regardless of what you see on the surface, it courses through their soul and veins, but they interpret it and comprehend it in very different ways, which is really why the structures and stages of spiritual and psychological development is so important to help us do that, understand that.
Yeah, exactly. And to uncover, or to let the evolutionary impulse do its magic, we have to step out of the way, you know?
Exactly.
That in the end, and that's kind of upper left quadrant work where we or the good old ego transcendence that nobody really wants to talk about anymore, but it's still a big deal, isn't it?
Oh, it's still a big deal. And I think that the longer I do this, the clearer it all becomes, but also the mystery gets bigger too.
Mhm.
And what just comes to mind as you're talking, back in 98, I made a commitment to enable human emergence. Okay. And today
Yeah.
that translates, or back in 2001, that translated into embracing the new human. And there's a new expression of humanness, which is still a small percentage of the population. But it's those individuals in that space who are probing and pulling and creating space in which all the earlier paradigms that coexist on the planet can actually move back into flow. And I think very metaphorically, so we don't swim through the river, we are swum by the water. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that latter one, I think, is what you're talking about. It's where we start to get the first sniffs of the choices we have, and we've outlined 3 paths. Let's keep it at that. But there's one that's conscious, and there's one that invites us to grow into a space that's indefinable, and that's the path that I believe we're on. But we're also in the death throes or the closing chapters of institutions and things that were previously successful, which nature doesn't like to let go of without a bit of a struggle and a bit of a tussle.
Yeah, it's beautiful how you describe it. And I had a conversation yesterday with Elizabeth de Bold, and she made this strong point of having to be in the unknown and just let ourselves be part of what is unfolding and what is emerging. And I'm totally, yeah, totally with that. I can feel that this is the right position. And then I also feel there is also a component of responding to what needs us. Yeah, like it's a very interesting balance between, or it's not even a balance. It's a paradox position of letting go and responding to life with what we can give, what we have, what we can give.
Yes. Well, I think that that's really the pathway that you and I have been enjoying in our own unique ways, in that we come across a point of view, suddenly the psychological space expands and our mind can grow into that, and then we grow into that new space. And it's that
Hmm.
transcending and including, if I use Ken Wilber's phraseology around it. But I think we're in a transition now that Graves really used the language for, which is it's literally beyond belief. Okay, and and as I was thinking about this morning, one of the most refreshing expansions to my awareness that I've been working with is through some practices that originated in Turkey in the early 1980s, and it's not something that would normally attract an individual. But one of my mentees asked me to go and suss something out. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because finally I'm finding something that communicates this journey and actually brings some substance to what we know happens in this transition to, let's call it second tier for the sake of
Hmm.
argument. In that transition, literally everything we believe to be true becomes reshaped and reframed. And so I think we're on the path to becoming fully human. It's when we leave behind the last vestiges of the animal kingdom, which is really what the transition into second tier is about. But those earlier capacities become reused, and the deep brain structures and processes become reused in new ways. And suddenly you're into a whole new explosion of self-awareness, but also of unity awareness and consciousness, where suddenly we have to slow down because the edges of the definitions that we used to hold true to become blurred and they're no longer
Yeah.
relevant. And
Yeah.
that's really the space I've operated in since the early 80s, well before I became across anything to do with the spell dynamics lineage and Graves and so on, Ken Wilber. It was through the work with community building with M. Scott Peck and their large group process, which really is the most elegant way of allowing an individual and a group to co-experience together, letting go of a trapeze swing, and they can see the new trapeze and they're reaching out for it, but they're not sure if they're going to make it. And so trapeze swing, surfing an open wave, the change has already happened, we're learning to grow into it. These are all metaphors, I think, that keep us open. Certainly they keep me open. And it means that we're always looking for things to stabilize our new knowing. And I think that's the gift you're bringing to us. You're just inviting us to say, hang on a moment, let's just check the definitions. And then in that moment, we're creating a new trampoline for our own respective freedom to discover and take further that which we've been experiencing.
Yeah. Do you have a sense for what is emerging in terms of like values? And you described beautifully the position that we are holding, but what let me rephrase.
Yeah.
If you look 100 years into the future, how would a third attractor, a teal turquoise culture look like? What would you see? What would be totally different than it is today, and what would probably be the same?
I honestly don't think we can predict it.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it feels presumptuous to even go into that space. What I am delighted though with is your, next 100 years. I think we have to accept this from this moment, it's a 200-year journey. But
Yeah.
we're enjoying the learning that's gone on over the last 100 years, which for an early wave will mean that they'll be cresting the wave of this transition 100 years from now, 50 years
Yeah.
from now, 10 years from now. So what we can predict is that there'll be a radical change in our relationship with the cosmos. What we can predict is that we will realize that as a species, we've been growing through a pathway where the codes and patterns were initially postulated by the all, let's call it the consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And that as with the consciousness and ourselves, we can look back and say, gosh, look what we did then. Well, how on earth did we interpret that particular scripture in that way and all these sorts of things? So we can we'll be able to look back and recognize the journey, because we'll have a greater capacity to appreciate that. So it'll be looking back at our species through our early and late stage adolescence. And I do think that the language of that time, it won't be spoken, but it will be known, this is the time of the genuine human. And it will be very much a time of curiosity as to how do we work together. I believe that we'll be using technology to maintain our individual and our individual freedom, but it will not detract from the benefit of activity or action as a means of refining, polishing, expanding awareness. So just before you started to record the call, we spoke about my work in monitoring nature. And that came about because I was tracking for methods that were holistically oriented, because if there's any validity to anything we're talking about theoretically, I should be able to go out on the planet and find people who've already transcended, included, and developed new ways. And that's really all that I've done since '97. When you met me in Switzerland, that was really the time when I was really active. It was the time when I was involved with the the recovery from the 30-year drought in Australia. And it's
Yeah.
in that process I came across farmers. I'm just going to alter my camera because I've got you on big screen, and I can't, every time I look at you, I feel like I'm looking the other way. It was a time when the conventional world wouldn't work.
Yeah.
20 years into the drought, conventional agriculture could not grow anything in a certain region in Australia. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, from my schooling and my awareness, I know that if life conditions are stressed and it's sustained for a long enough time, that's where I need to go to find what the answer to your question. So I go out and
Mm-hmm.
explore the hotspots. And in that process, I discovered individuals who today would be the mainstream. So today, the language around regenerative agriculture was being born in the meetings in Switzerland and the meetings in
Yeah.
Australia at the time you and I met. And I found individuals who completely outperformed the present paradigm. So the conventional paradigm is very much mechanistic, seeing the soil as a chemistry set, get the chemistry right, and things will grow. Now, that's true to a point, but there's a very different pedagogenesis or
Yeah.
development of soil, depending on whether you work with the natural processes or whether you treat it like a chemistry set and force it into inevitably less requisite variety than nature accidentally created. And in that process, I began to work with innovators and farmers who realized that they had to go back to square one and reinvent from scratch and understand
Mm-hmm.
soil processes biologically. So microbiome was the new term. Most people didn't know how to spell it. And it was a very rich time because a lot of the work around the microbiome was still being defined.
Yeah.
And they completely outperformed. And they were so good, they became attacked by the old system. So spotter planes
Yeah.
looking for illegal boreholes. Your grass is green. Why is that? Farmers ringing up with excitement, telling the authorities that actually I've just got so many bales of product off this land. And the voice at the other end of the phone would say, well, that's impossible on that land. You must have miscounted and put the phone down. Okay.
Oh
So
no.
suddenly we find that in times of great innovation, great progress, where one allies with nature's processes and flows, a lot of resistance came out. And it was then I started to look at the writings and the work in that space and shifting from an awareness of a snapshot in time of soil to process of soil. Don Beck used to use a phrase where we're working in the comet's tail. So in the comet's tail of these wonderful processes that exist on our planet, soil was a pattern left behind. Plants were animals, humans, our
Yeah.
Earth's ecosystem. They're all patterns left behind in the comet's tail of this evolutionary impulse that is pretty neutral on how we organize ourselves. So
Yeah.
those three options you've outlined, I think, are bang on in that they all could be distinct possibilities if we fail to discern a way forward. So it was in that work there I started to become interested in the new, more holistically oriented applications in agriculture, and it's applicable across all forms of business. And I went out and tested it, just as I did with Spiral Dynamics. I traveled the world, making sure that the stories I was told had some validity. I did the same around holistically oriented management, and
Yeah.
that led me into ecological monitoring. But the big surprise for me was that when I was working with farmers and growers and leaders, whenever you took them into the field to read the patterns of the fundamental processes of nature, which you can do in about 45 minutes to an initial level, I just saw them grow. So here, just like I've been doing with the methods and so on that were developed around understanding human stage development, I found that I could use learning about the processes of the soil to raise consciousness, because the
Mm.
dynamics and the patterns are implicit in that third attractor capacity that
Yeah.
some are learning
Yeah.
to utilize.
That's so interesting. Would you then say these people that you met, where you feel like they already live from a different paradigm, would you say that showed in different lines of development, or mainly in like how they work the land, or in what I'm curious is how full this development is going beyond the actual predicament already was when you met it.
Okay, you get initial surge in awareness, recognition, surge in awareness, and then the logical conclusions to your decisions start to change. Now, if you go too far, you get pushback. So a farmer might start to get pushback from the accountants or the
Mm-hmm.
advisors or their staff. Okay, and suddenly that brings a barrier to progress or in the conditions for change that need to be overcome. And very often it's handling the pushback from the habitat that's the hardest thing for them to handle. However, what I do believe that we're doing when we're working with human stage development, awareness raising, we're teaching people the patterns left behind of a
Yeah.
process, the emergent cyclical double helix, if we use that, which is basically life forms shaped by habitat. It's exactly the same. When a cow meets the grass, it's life form shaping habitat, vice versa. So we're
Mm.
teaching the first principles of the best we know about evolutionary and emergent qualities. And the emergence one is an interesting one because when we're working with plant species, it's much easier to see the patterns of the successional dynamics and then link it to, I forget the paleo biological inquiries that say,
Yeah.
well, look, you're enjoying all this wildlife and these plants on your land, but and most of these plants, if you got the ferns and the brackens, they've been around for about 300 million years. But the plant we want you to focus on is the new kid on the block. It's the perennial
Yeah.
grass. First emerged about 40 to 70 million years ago. That plant emerged with a requisite variety that was greater than any plant previously.
Oh wow.
So you hear the corollaries, and suddenly you can
Yeah.
stand in a field and teach them to read the successional dynamics. So one of the things I've found is that the language that Claire Graves developed around the change framework, the six conditions for change and so on and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
it's day-to-day language now in all of our ecological monitors. This land is in an
Mm.
arrested state. It's in an open state. Okay. And so we can start to bring in the metaphors and the constructs around which people can articulate something
Yeah.
that previously they couldn't. And the way I'm thinking of it at the moment, we're giving them ciphers, things around which they can translate and utilize what they already know. So I go back to what I said earlier. By the time you and I come to have this conversation, the change has already happened. We're just learning to grow into it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Are you in contact with uh, agriculture that is not yet there, like with the like in I know that there is a lot of monoculture in a lot of countries that provide
Yeah.
nutrition for the world, and that should change for us to keep the planet healthy,
Yeah.
no?
Yeah.
So
So,
I could imagine that approaches that you have in mind and that you can teach would help a lot to change that environment too. But I could also imagine that there are probably at the beginning financial considerations that would be in the way of today's of the first tier thinking.
okay.
So what is the landscape there?
I think I just want to add on something. I think what we develop with this learning we've done over the last 30, 40 years is we know how to respond when the other person's questions arise.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's where I'm coming from. Okay. So to do I'm blushing when I say this, but to warrant the term you gave me as a mentor in human emergence, I need to be able to operate anywhere on the full spectrum. Okay.
Yes.
That means I've deliberately gone out into different parts of the world. So last year we were in Peru working with hill tribes that I would say are the longest running cultural dynamic on the planet. And basically, they live at 16,000 feet. right on the limits of where it's possible to live, and they grow
Mm-hmm.
potatoes. But how they do it is very grand, okay?
Mm.
And they're not too worried about the financial transactions that go with that. So basically, whether it's growers in India, so this Regenerate Earth is the identity that I acquired in Australia. And just to say, I don't just work in agriculture, I'm just using it. So we work across all sectors. But
Oh, yeah.
in India, you'll find one of the largest initiatives where the principles of um, ecological literacy are being introduced, and it's one of the largest regenerative initiatives on the planet. Excuse me. And so these are very small growers, tribal communities, right the way through to we deal with some of the training of some of the farmers on some of the biggest feedlots. So I need to know that whatever we're going to work with can cover the smallest scale operation through to the largest scale operation.
Mm-hmm.
And we use our understanding of human emergence to know how to respond to a situation. So in Zimbabwe, for example, the teachers down there were telling us that they suddenly discovered that they could not get the village to change unless they got permission from the ancestors. Okay.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
immediately we're calibrated. We know what that dynamic is. We know what's next naturally for them. So, have I answered your question?
Yes, for the lower end of the spiral, but not yet for the orange end of the spiral of the
Okay.
first tier of the big monocultures
Yeah.
who are actually destroying a lot of the soil and
Okay. Well, let's go across the full scope. So
yeah,
basically let's use spiral dynamics nomenclature. So from a beige purple early stage red dynamic, that's really what we've just been talking about. If we go
yeah,
into the core of conventional, many of the people we work with and the organizations we work with are trained in what's called holistic management. So they go and train and mentor back into conventional agriculture from a much more holistic awareness. So, for example, we
yeah,
collaborate closely with people like Gabe Brown. We're all trained in holistic management. So that's what I've been focused on since 2016 is the development of that, where the primary metric and primary means of discernment of the effectiveness of the tools and methods that you use is the changes in the ecosystem processes. Okay.
yeah,
So we know that a lot of conventional farmers are passing through that. We know that a lot of the policy changes and what's been talked about internationally are going to change the playing field radically. We do know that there are feedlots that are like hell on earth, and I recommend everybody to go to them and visit them because they are the worst case example you'll find of man's domination of nature. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
So in that middle domain, they're trying to work out how to stay viable and win the game. So it's that
yeah,
winning the game dynamic that is still the dominant. But they're in the death throes because out of the wings is coming the next generation growing capability, where the interest is. So if you go into this is so conventional, early stage organic, permaculture, biodynamics, and natural agriculture where in natural agriculture, they teach the farmers to have a spiritual relationship with the land. That's one of the
yeah,
fastest growing domains with the highest quality produce, highest nutritional density, and highest nutritional spectrum, but they are not
beautiful.
a mainstream by any scale, any sense.
Yeah, yeah,
So we're seeing new growing practices emerging. But the one thing I can say, it doesn't matter whether it's a small grower, the conventional, or these higher end practices we're talking about, they are all realizing now that they need to improve their ecological literacy and work with the processes of nature. And that fundamentally is the niche that we're serving in our agricultural work.
yeah, yeah. And would you say, last question about agriculture, but I find it very fascinating. Would you say that natural agriculture, highest level that you have in mind or that you teach and that you make people aware of, could feed all 8 billion people of this world?
It could if we chose to.
Yeah,
It's no different to your the response to the third attractor is conscious choice. Now, conscious is that conscious choice where you're working simultaneously with the evolutionary imperative, really the spiritual imperative of a human species, whilst you're also working with the fundamental processes of this planet, Earth's ecosystem and the 4 ecosystem processes, and then working with the cultural dynamics and understanding the flows and so on of those, whilst you're also understanding that designs of business, designs of organizations, designs of social systems all are really reflections of particular stages of development. So you better make sure you're designing open systems that meet people where they're going rather than where they were.
Yeah. So where do you see in your work, or broad now in your work, the biggest inhibitors of this moving up and forward to something else? What is in the way? Where would you, or are you starting to work on
Okay.
to kind of eliminate the hurdles or the
Okay. The barriers to change are many, and very often, and I was discussing this yesterday. So food and fiber is grown, it's converted as product, and it's then sold into the marketplace. If we change the boundary conditions and the standards placed upon agriculture for, say, the development or the production of milk, it would change the industry overnight. Okay, because most of the standards and the performance criteria that a farm is working towards is one that pays the bills, and they have to hit certain criteria. The problem is the criteria are based upon an understanding of nature that is no longer relevant. It's performance, high performance, maximum efficiency, low resilience agriculture. And so we've dug ourselves into a hole in the quest for improvement, in that we don't realize that the boundary conditions we create define the way in which an individual responds to those boundary conditions. So it doesn't matter. So basically, one of the big change capabilities we need to develop is how to develop more holistically oriented policy that understands that. So you're not just designing for one worldview center of gravity, you're designing for a spectrum, and recognizing and celebrate the importance of each until, and this is not something I talk about too often, over the next 100, 200 years, there'll be capacities of our species that disappear. So we know from the research the capacity for innate fear disappears in the transition into second tier. The postulate, the early stage data, is that anger will be the next thing to disappear. So it's basically that everything becomes an I choose to. So if you alter the base neurobiology that allows in new information to flow through us, so it's my Peruvian teacher would say, you basically become a hollow bamboo, which I know is common in many spiritual traditions. The more hollow your bamboo, the cleaner the interpretation of how life works. That will shape how you behave.
Yeah, and that brings us back to the ego transcendence part. Hollowing out that bamboo means to step out of the way. The small self steps out of the way and leaves room for something bigger. In Daniel Schmachtenberger's original 2 talks that I listened to about the Third Attractor, he also states that he thinks that human beings are fundamentally rivalrous, and this rivalrousness is in the way of us actually changing and creating a better world. And I'm not sure that's true. I'm curious what you think.
Well, it's something that we'll grow out of, but we'll find ways of maintaining that dynamic tension that stimulates creativity. Okay, so basically, we have the driven responses to a situation, which can be attack and competition and so on and so forth, or it can be a very inward response. So once you've understood those patterns, they are drives, and you really no control over them until you transcend them, and they morph neurobiologically. When you get into the higher order, we're literally off the map, but from my observations and from my experiences, it literally is realizing that there is the fundamental patterning of our cosmos. We can assume to know a little bit, and people like Howard Bloom, I think, bring great weight to this because, you know, in spiral dynamics, you'd have the expressive self-sacrificial self. Okay, Howard takes it a stage further. So the Bloom pentad, diversity generator, conformity regulator. So basically, what you have is this dynamic. We live in this amazing creative universes, and as something new emerges, it gets tested, and if it works, it stabilizes. So it moves from diversity generator to conformity regulator because it gets catalyzed and spread across the whole. But it just doesn't affect that domain it operates in. It affects the whole verticality. So that the next wave of diversity generation is even more creative. Okay, so diversity generation, conformity regulation, and this is why I think it's prudent to us to be having the conversation over the next 200 years, because there's many authors that and much evidence to suggest that institutional change is our greatest barrier. When I was in Switzerland, students that came on some of the courses you were on would say, the problem in Switzerland is Switzerland thinks we're finished.
Yeah.
We've cracked the environment.
There is truth to that.
One of my favorite places, but I'm saying it because there is a wisdom there that he could see that they think they're finished and they've cracked the environmental, but they haven't cracked the fact that they're an island on a planet that's doing other things environmentally. So if you want proactive management, the Swiss are role models. But it was the capacity to realize that they didn't know how to navigate the next economic transition. So the swatches served as the stimulator for the last first order change within the paradigm that created the problems. And now, not too sure what the next wave is going to be. So when we hear circular economies, it's really where people are coming up against the glass ceiling of that early stage exit out of green, where the life support system and the codependency is with orange, is with the wealth generated in the tail end of the old system. So it goes round and round and round. But while that's going round and round, life is going around. And that, I think, is what you're doing in India. Okay. But also you'll be in a country that's going through its own very significant transitions that still need to play out and act out. And so what we know is that for the development of any species, there are certain life cycles and there are certain features that shape and enhance. There are certain features that shape and regress the life form. And so we have free will up to a point. I don't think we've got free will in some of the fundamental patterns we work with, and we have to learn to work with them. But as we learn to realize that we do have the capacity to choose and design our way out of this in a way that is completely different to anything we know, I, as an individual, have certain hope in an uncertain world. I've seen enough and known enough that everything that I've ever been taught is true if you choose to go and find the right context in which it was created. So when you're dealing with these meta theories, the evolutionary dynamics that Andrew was talking about, and the spiritual dynamics, there's truth. There's truths in there, and there's enough truth in that to get us to the start of the next wave where the truths will be different. So I'm a strong believer that we've most of our social structures and institutions we've outgrown. So we're in that space, we're in that void between what was and what will be. And it's a time when we have to be able to swim through with volition and work with the first principles or the postulates. And that I really celebrate Don Beck when I recognize the work I did with him on postulates, because it was leading edge stuff, and very few people really grasped what he was about. But for me, we can move forward with knowing, with some level of confidence, and go and test things. But we need to move to leading indicators of change to help us stay on track. Most of the metrics that we work with in society are lagging indicators. And unfortunately, I don't think the greatest risk to us is climate change. I think, yes, we're climate shapers, there's no doubt about it. The greatest risk is the breakdown of the human immune system, because we're not picking up the signals of the deviation of health. And that is something I invite anyone listening to this to bring knowledge and have conversations about that, because that is my biggest concern.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. But I hear you say you are fundamentally positive that humanity will find its way, one way or the other, to a higher integration.
I think humankind is finding its way, and humankind on this planet is finding its way in unique life conditions that probably don't exist anywhere in all universes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a uniqueness, just like you and I are more unique than our fingerprints. No other life form in the universes is experiencing what you're experiencing in this moment, Daniela.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where it starts to become interesting. And this is where one, I suppose, the space that's inviting us over the next 200 years is that profound appreciation, that essential appreciation of who we really are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful.
And then that will be the start. It's not the
Yeah.
end.
But that provokes a question that I have to ask you. Where are we going with AI? What is your stand on AI? Because so many people are kind of indicating this is it. Humanity is done. AI is coming and killing us all. That's one train of thought, yeah. And the other one is we will be so dependent of AI that we lose humanity instead of actually finding us or our true nature, as you just beautifully put. So what is your stand or understanding or hope?
Well, the life conditions we create of ourselves are inviting us to upstretch to be able to handle that question. Okay, that is the truth. What I believe we will see, and when we talk about AI, there's such a spectrum. Okay, but also we need to bring in the other changes, the other technologies that are allowing AI to start to accelerate. And yes, AI is an autonomous let's call it an autonomous change agent, will never have the same impression of universe as we have. Okay. Now this is where, what's there's an Italian gentleman who I think his work is impeccable. I can't remember his name.
Yes, I know exactly who you mean, but I don't have the name either.
It will come back to me. Anyway, so we can't deal with AI alone. We've got energy, transport, so renewable energies, renewable energy-based transport, new forms of food production, the processing of food, so precision fermentation and so on and so forth, new materials, and AI, which the spectrum can be from robotics through to an intelligence that we may choose to assume is smarter than we are. There's no doubt they can process vast volumes of data. So we have to realize we're working with a spectrum that's got depth. And the one thing that's missing in all that is our ability to discern how we choose to do with all of this. Because at the moment, as a collective, it doesn't matter whether it's community or nation or continent, the one thing we don't do is have a sense of the quality of life that we're looking for. And this is where the holistic management comes in. Nor do we ever think about what's the resource base we need to enjoy those life conditions. Now, the resource base is basically all things ecological. The resource base also is cultural. So there's a quality of cultural life where mutual trust and respect builds a platform for really phenomenal experiences as a species. And healthy blue is much better for us than a punitive blue, okay? And
Yeah.
so the third dimension is making sure that social systems enable us to enjoy that quality of life. So here you can start to hear that we have to flip everything on its head. And it's how do these platforms serve humanity to explore and make sense of the future and deal with the tail end of the challenges that we have with less requisite variety in certain contexts. Okay. Now it means that we can take responsibility and shape the processes of nature. We can put in place leading edge indicators, and we can influence at a climate at a world stage, not through geoengineering, which is a technology, but through understanding the hydrology of the planet. That's really Walter Yeni and Regenerator. Absolutely brilliant. What about trust and respect? That really starts with me, my responsibility. How do I behave? How do I relate to others? Okay. And it's that, how do I behave? How do I relate to others in a way that maintains their trust and respect whilst we go through these transitions together? And the
Yeah.
last one is the interesting one because it requires a high level of discernment. And it goes back to your question on the barriers. If we have inappropriate business metrics, if we have inappropriate governmental metrics, if we have inappropriate planetary metrics, if we have inappropriate policy, we actually create institutions that will be sustaining and blocking the very progress that we want. So just like we had, spotter planes and surprise visits from the authorities in Australia for farmers with green grass in a desert, the unintended consequences of that are dire because we block the very thing that is going to be the key to our future. So that ability to handle that future resource base in that way is my responsibility to work with others to consider that, and that. Social systems, business systems, how I behave in a way that retains trust and respect, whilst also making sure that as we do our work, as we live, we are enhancing the vibrancy of the planet. It's not about regenerating at the moment, it's recovering. Recovery, recovery, regeneration, and renewal. It's the renewal that's the space, Daniela, that I think we're hunting for. That's what the third attractor is about. It's when we've chose to renew in a way that's literally beyond our comprehension.
Yeah. Do you think that is a question that came up in many of my conversations, that the way forward is a way of bottom up change, like starting with all of us, starting with the individual coming together and then initiating the change? Or do you think it has to come top down or also top down to actually have the power to for real change?
The change comes across the full spectrum of humanity by being able to discern stuff that works and leaves behind a healthy planet, a healthy culture, and a healthy social environment.
Yeah.
It can come from the creativity and the innovation can come from anywhere. Very often, excuse me, it's the human foibles that block it. Jealousy, fear, greed, anger. Well, we're learning how to recognize those qualities and realize that that's this evolutionary impulse giving us a nudge to grow and evolve beyond our old ways.
Yeah. We do in Manifest Nirvana, and we did with Andrew a lot of we-space work, as you probably know, like evolutionary dialogue, intersubjective non-duality work. And I still feel this is a beautiful, important component that could be used to find solutions in this open space of being together.
Yes.
Connected to the evolutionary impulse.
Yeah, I agree. And so I was speaking in a city in the UK last week, and it's an area that has a high population of people of the Quaker practice, let's call it that.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And one of the qualities that they have is through their spiritual practice, they know how to embrace silence as a collective. And I suppose the language I could use today is that through the individual source or the message comes. Okay. And
Yeah.
so I'm a strong believer that that we space, the collective, is also the ultimate I space, because it's in that process of the individual learning to know and discern what is the moment to offer their contribution that it is equally as important. So I agree that we space is, and I would add, I think it's the ultimate I space. The challenge in today's world, it's rare that you'll find individuals prepared to give their time to experience it, because they're so attuned to doing. But the benefits, and I've witnessed this over the years, and I suppose it was one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about what I do, is that I've witnessed miracles in the we space.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, me too. And I agree with you. It's quite difficult to create coherence in these we spaces, also coherence in terms of people staying with it and don't just see it as a practice once a week, but see it as a cultural good that can be developed and actually could be the way we are together all the time.
Yeah,
That so it For me, I feel like it has to come out of a practice environment where you can experience higher state and this beautiful being together into a cultural value that can carry all the challenges that we have in our communities.
yeah. I I've often pondered this, when I'm working with organizations, and obviously from a second tier or third attraction perspective, what is the role and functions of our collective activity? You just articulated. If we're designing organizations and social systems to enable human emergence, that's a completely different imperative to cost reduction, keeping prices down, which
Yeah,
and maintaining political control. So what you've just articulated, I think, very smartly, is the distinction. So in this new space, the we space will be valued and utilized, but it won't be enforced, because it's like, if we're teaching this work that I teach, individuals come in, they get excited, they go through. I don't want them hanging on my shirt tails for the next 20, 30 years. I want them
exactly.
to find their exit and start their own journey. And that can happen in many ways. So the like you and I have not kept contact for years. However, when we bumped into each other on that street in Edinburgh, when
Yes.
Andrew was behind you, it was as though we'd never been apart.
Yeah, totally true.
So we space extends beyond the localized experience that we witness and might define as a we space. The we space is infinite.
Yeah, yeah, that's so beautiful. And what I find so fascinating in the weave space is also that what you said a few minutes back, that autonomy and communion actually are not contradictions. And that's what you find out in a truly open we space, is that the individuality is actually even stronger coming through a wide open authentic self than when it's coming through a contracted ego. And that's something that is so hard to explain to people that haven't experienced it yet, and that feel like, yeah, but ego is important and I want to keep my sovereignty and my individuality and my special gifts. And when you actually do it, you find no, that's all exactly where it should be. And each, as you said, each and every one of us is an individual, and we will always be an individual as long as we are in this human body. But we can shine when we actually give ourselves in this bigger context. It's as
Yeah.
simple and as difficult as that.
And that shining is often a very quiet place, without
Yeah,
voice,
yeah.
without noise. So an individual can walk into a room with the most significant flamboyance and never say a word.
Hmm.
Spirit.
Yeah,
Let's qualify that. I didn't say the most significant spiritual flamboyance. Okay.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it can look all kind of ways. That's the thing. It can look very quiet and it can look very animated and it can change.
Yeah.
Third
And
thing
I'm
that is
so it's
happening.
really
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying I'm just enjoying you speaking to you whilst you're in India because I was just scanning and I just felt very comfortable with the fact that in this conversation with um, there's a we space that it exists. And I often think about this is that the we space is indefinable, but it exists. It's like an invisible membrane around the
Yeah,
planet for those who are ready to embrace it consciously. And I
yeah,
think that what you're doing through your work and through these type of conversations are just saying, "Hey, just come and poke your head through the
yeah.
membrane of this we space."
Let's go there. Let's meet there.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and it's fun. I mean, it's
Yeah, yeah.
fun. It's
And what is also fitting in, and I just tried to put it all together with all the good things you said, also about the importance of tension. Yeah, like, but this we space is capable to hold tension as an evolutionary force. Andrew called it evolutionary tension when you bump against each other, but from that wide open space, and still have to negotiate what is the you have to have discernment. You have to discern what is the better, what is the worse solution. You have to find out. It's not that it's just everything goes and every perspective has the same value and every opinion has the same value. No, no, we want to find out how we can create this tension for the sake of evolution to move forward.
and the good thing is that it's taken 14 billion years for us to have this conversation. For a life form
Yes.
to emerge to have this conversation. So there's a lot of good practice around in the way the universe functions.
Yeah.
And there's many milestones in my life, but the one that it seems relevant in this moment is that I'm an engineer originally, a senior manager in the water industry, and I became very interested by a Yorkshire innovator who completely innovated industrial wastewater treatment from one of the biggest chemical works in Europe, which was in the UK.
Mm.
And I went to see him to find out how he was doing it. And I walked there and it was just plant reeds. And I couldn't see the chemicals coming in, but I could see water that was safe to drink coming out of the end of these
Oh,
reed beds.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, I was trained as an engineer. I'd been through the previous 15 years, making sure that automation was in place, technology, measurements. None of it was working very well. And I said to Professor Gill, I said, Professor Gill, how do you know this is working? And he just dragged me by my collar and took me around the corner away from prying eye. And he said, Christopher, he said, I want you to remember one thing. The most sensitive instrument in the universe is the human body. And he walked off. And I've been living, I'm a living experiment to work out the answer to that question ever since, and the work on human emergence or agriculture is just the means by which I can
Hmm.
do my own
Hmm.
experimentation,
Hmm.
work out actually what he meant in the first place. And I believe it's
Hmm.
true.
Yeah, yeah. That's really beautiful. Wow. So, is there anything you would like to cover when we talk about the third attractor? Anything we have not touched upon?
Um, we'll know it when we get there. What we have to be cautious of is premature interpretations of that, because I
Yeah.
literally think it's beyond belief. One thing I would add is that probably the greatest challenge for individuals today is for all of us, and I include myself, is realizing the significance of the human species in the grand scheme of things. And also, that means that if we are on this journey and always, in the work with Don Bayer, Chris Cowan, it was always the human emergence and the focus on organizations taking on that understanding for, creating the life conditions that enabled emergence. The level of service we're being invited to, I find I'm being invited to exhibit, means I have to let go of the conventional economic paradigm, because I have to know enough to know how to maintain the material bits, but the level of service and the level of responding to opportunities where the volition is so strong within me is something that's really surprised me, and it drives some people crazy. It means I've been married 3 times, but if I get the knowing that I need to do something, I will go do it, because I'm curious to see what was it that I was being invited to explore. And I do believe that one of the things we'll discover in this 100-year horizon that you described is the significance of the human to self and the significance of humankind in all universes.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was delightful. And I have a feeling this is a conversation one will have to listen more than once. It was very full and very beautiful. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure and a delight to speak with you again and do this. And thank you so much, because it was very timely. And now I shall get back into the grunt work of doing the technology that enables farmers to read these processes of nature.
Very good.
All right. Thank you.